Five.
I bought my ticket on a Frio train. Lost that girl, gone away again. No, it's not right, and I've been mean. Company spoke, and I went into a dream. I took that swing.
Oh yeah. We're gonna hit them with some fake news. We're gonna give them some hidden facts. It's a low ruffle. What you got?
That's supper. Another priming.
No, it's great.
Which old man? Which one do you mean? Ross.
That will kick you out. Yeah. Huh? From where? Yeah, but I'll just crouch. Not right up close to the table.
Guy in the Oh, yeah, that's right. Wow. We want to stay here.
Stay here?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just there's a bit of walking and then all crew pick up.
Go a bit down. Okay.
Turn the key.
I just wanted to make proceedings comfortable.
Yeah. They're about 2 minutes. It's pretty grand. Okay. Alright, too fun. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Good afternoon. Hello. Just to let you know, they're on the move, and so we'll be here in a minute or two. Just to remind you, we're going to have the signing first by Minister Bridges and Senator Sinodinos, and then Prime Minister English will make an opening statement, followed by Turnbull, and then we will do 3 questions from each side. Okay?
Right.
Rachel,
Yeah.
say a few more things into that microphone.
Certainly. It's my pleasure.
Just checking that.
Hey, Teddy, can you chat in that other microphone? Beside you.
Just there, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You on the live, mate?
Yeah, but it's dodgy to be signal, probably to do it later. They can write to it, but they probably won't be able to use it for radio. Radio will be right there.
We're staying on the side.
You're going to be low.
It's going to be low. But not from the start, we're going to be at this one. No, you can't go there.
No, I know. But once they get
We're not here, we're not.
Right.
Yeah, it's like walking in there.
Nearly out.
yeah, we'll retrieve.
Yeah, we're still on
I've rung them, bro. Simon.
So,
I'm not saying that,
Hey, release the cold. Oh, wonderful, but everyone's saying that. Yes. I'm gonna laugh at something. Oh, they're right now.
knowing,
Just go and have coffee. There's great coffee and oh,
yeah, so.
I'm very working hard, but you but even all day.
I know the guy from Suits. Louis lived from Suits as he could. Yeah, no, he's here. Louis Litt is in this building right now.
How do you know? I want a photo. I want a selfie.
Saw it breakfast. You got some samosas.
Nah, you're good.
You come over.
Wait a minute. Right. You need to
You good?
Not as bad as Chinese security.
well, okay, these are trying on the large go in. And take everything.
Can you guys just embargo that until we start speaking?
Don't you want?
Very.
So excited.
Very.
I now welcome the Right Honourable Bill English, Prime Minister of New Zealand, and the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, MP, Prime Minister of Australia. We're going to start with the signing of the Australia-New Zealand Science and Innovation Agreement, which will be signed by the Minister for Economic Development, the Honourable Simon Bridges, and Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, Senator the Honourable Arthur Sinodinos.
Thanks very much, comrade.
I now invite Prime Minister English to make an opening statement.
You're on, Paddy. It's my great pleasure to welcome Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Mrs Lucy Turnbull to Queenstown today, along with Treasurer Scott Morrison and Industry Minister Arthur Sinodinos. Malcolm, I'm sure you will agree our relationship is in great shape. One reason for that has been your personal commitment to resolving issues that have been of concern to New Zealand, and we respect that ongoing commitment. Australia is our closest security partner and ally. A friendship is never stronger in times of need, and Malcolm, New Zealand was very appreciative of the assistance that was spontaneously offered by Australia to combat the fires affecting Christchurch. Underpinning our close friendship is a number of factors. Australia is the biggest market for our goods and services exports, our biggest source of capital, and our biggest destination for overseas investment. There's around 2.5 million trips across the Tasman each year, many of course from Australia direct here to Queenstown. We are each other's largest source of inbound visitors, so we are unique as two of the world's most integrated economies. We're also partners on the world stage. Our Trans-Tasman relationship leads the way in openness and free trade. We are known and respected for being principled and ambitious, and we're focused on working together to open markets and create an even playing field so our businesses can take advantage of the huge opportunities on our doorstep. We are both uniquely placed to capitalise on fast-paced growth in the Asia-Pacific. Like Australia, we New Zealanders are very aware we won't get rich by selling to ourselves. Over the last 30 years, we have prospered because of the success of the Australian economy, and we wish it ongoing success. And we recognise today that both our countries can do better still by selling to more than 800 million people that live in TPP countries. Trade liberalisation agreements like CER and TPP are not about big business, they're about creating jobs. That's why Malcolm and I are both focused on regional trade and the opportunities that free trade agreements represent. We're focused on finding ways to take the TPP forward now that the United States has withdrawn. We've agreed it's important to reach out to our TPP partners to continue to work to secure the significant economic and strategic benefits that TPP would deliver. Malcolm and I today welcome the signing of the Australia-New Zealand Science, Research and Innovation Cooperation Agreement, a concrete example of further steps towards a single economic market. The agreement signals our shared goal to establish ourselves as smart countries, committed to science and innovation, and it will continue to evolve along with our priorities. The aim is to generate new job opportunities and growth. One of the first joint projects will be a second-generation satellite-based augmentation system in both countries. We've also agreed to strengthen cooperation and explore avenues to engage in genomics in healthcare and cooperating on planning and investment to work with third countries, for example, through the Global Alliance on Chronic Disease. Malcolm and I have discussed the pathway to citizenship for New Zealanders in Australia. We appreciate very much the investment the Turnbull government has made in providing a pathway for long-term resident New Zealanders who have made their home in Australia. On behalf of the many New Zealanders affected by the Kaikoura earthquakes in November, I thank Malcolm for the Australian government's significant contribution, and I can recall my own visit to your naval ship, which voluntarily left the naval celebrations in Auckland, steamed to Kaikoura and helped to evacuate hundreds of people from a town that was isolated by the earthquakes. That spontaneous response was yet another reminder that our two countries stand by each other when times are tough. Prime Minister, I'm looking forward to continuing our discussions during the remainder of our visit, but I now invite you to make some remarks of your own.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. You've been very, very kind, and I want to thank you and your wife, Dr. English, for the hospitality you've shown Lucy and myself, and of course your ministers have shown my ministers, Scott Morrison and Arthur Sinodinos. So we've had a very good discussion. You began with a reflection on the assistance that we've offered in respect to the fires around Christchurch. Can I say that we are at one with New Zealanders in mourning the death of Steve Askin, one of New Zealand's finest soldiers, who died fighting that fire, died as he had lived his life in the New Zealand Army, defending his countrymen, selflessly serving his nation. The firefighters of New Zealand and Australia fling themselves into the furnace, standing between the fury of nature and the lives, the homes of their communities. They are heroic men and women, and they reach out and help each other across the Tasman again and again. And it is that same spirit that we remembered this morning at Arrowtown. It's that Anzac spirit. 100 years on, it is stronger than ever. And now, in the Middle East and around the region, Australians and New Zealanders are working together to combat terrorism, to stand up for freedom, to defend the values that we share. So, Bill, it's been a tough time, and I know you're coming up to the anniversary of the Christchurch earthquake as well. Nature can be very cruel in both our countries, floods and fire and earthquakes. But those tough times bring out the best in Australians and New Zealanders, and they bring out that Anzac solidarity again and again. And we have so many shared values and shared agendas. One of them that Bill spoke of is free trade. I mean, you said very eloquently, I made a note of it, you can't get rich selling things to yourselves. Well, we want our businesses to sell to 24 million Australians, but we want them to be selling to 7.4 billion people all around the world. It's a great big world out there, and we've got some of the smartest, most talented people in our countries, and they want to have the biggest and the most open playing field to run onto, because they're the best. And that's why we're committed to free trade. That's why, like you, we were sorry the new American administration pulled out of the TPP, but we'll continue to open up, working together, recognising our shared interests are in opening up more economic opportunities, more trade opportunities for our two nations, because, as you said, trade means jobs, and it's not just an opportunity for big businesses, it's an opportunity for businesses of every size. And of course, as we move more and more to internet e-commerce platforms, the opportunity for small businesses, very small businesses, mum and dad businesses, to get into these big markets, particularly the big Asian markets, is greater than ever. So I want to thank you too for the commitment that you've shown always to work with us right around the world, and especially in our endeavours on security. This year we are celebrating many anniversaries at the moment, both of the First World War 100 years ago, which we remembered particularly at the Arrowtown Memorial, but also this week, 75 years since the fall of Singapore, when both Australia and New Zealand, feeling that they had been completely secure and protected by the might of the Royal Navy and the impregnable island fortress of Singapore, realised that the world, their world, our parents' world had changed. And what a generation they were. We saw some of them there today at Arrowtown. What a generation of men and women they were. How hard they fought in freedom's cause, and then, after the war, were able to forgive. They were a mighty generation, and it was good that we were there to meet with them and honour them and their service and their sacrifice. But right now, everywhere, Australians and New Zealanders are working together. We work together diplomatically, we're working together building the capacity of the Iraqi armed forces to defend their nation, to recover their nation from the scourge of terrorism, for the scourge of Daesh. So, Bill, it is a great partnership. It is built on millions and millions of Australians and New Zealanders working together, family. We are truly a family, a trans-Tasman family, and it's wonderful to be here with you. I look forward to having a very strong relationship with you as Prime Minister. We look forward, as we were discussing earlier, with Stephen and Simon and my ministers, we're looking forward to learning more from you. You know, I've always been an absolutely unalloyed fan of New Zealand. I feel that you do many things more efficiently and more cost-effectively than we do. Your distinguished predecessor, John Key, used to say it's because you didn't have as much money to waste as we Australians did. But I know it was because of the efficiency of the finance minister that made it all possible. And I know that as Prime Minister you'll continue to do that. But we can share so much experience. Our countries are so similar. If something works in New Zealand, it'll probably work in Australia, and vice versa. If it doesn't work in Australia, it may not work in New Zealand. We can all learn a lot from working more closely together. And so isn't it great that we've signed this agreement on science and innovation? How fantastic is it that our best and brightest are going to be working together to solve the riddles of genomics, to find the cures, to deal with the most challenging illnesses in the future. We are the best, Aussies and Kiwis, and when we work together, we're unbeatable. So it's great to be here.
Thank you, Prime Ministers. We're now going to have some questions from the media, and the first question is from Patrick Gower.
Prime Ministers, my question is about the change in leadership in the United States, and in particular, the practicality of dealing with Donald Trump on a leader-to-leader level. Prime Minister Turnbull, if I could ask you first about the practicalities of dealing with Donald Trump after your own phone call. What's the approach of dealing with the President? What's the approach of dealing with the President?
Well, it's the only approach to take when dealing with any President or any Prime Minister is to be frank and forthright. and I'm too old to be any different, I might add. So, and I suspect Bill's too old to change too. So we had a very constructive call. That's to say, President Trump and I have had several calls now. We've had a very constructive call. It was frank and forthright, and it was very valuable. So, and I thanked him for the commitment that he made.
And just a follow-up to that, today we've seen a press conference by President Trump where he has discussed at length this issue of fake news. Prime Minister Turnbull, do you believe there is such a thing as fake news? and you too, Prime Minister English.
Well, let me be very brief on this point. A very great politician, Winston Churchill, once said that politicians complaining about the newspapers is like a sailor complaining about the sea. It's not much point. That's the media we live with, and we have to get our message across, and we thank you all in the media for your kind attention.
We just say you're wrong, Paddy. We don't call it fake news.
The second question is from Lauren Giannoli.
Prime Ministers, thank you for both of your time this afternoon. I've got a question for both of you. The Defence Minister, Maurice Payne, says that Australia is open to considering a bigger commitment to the fight against ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Now, should you both receive a request from President Donald Trump for boots on the ground, how far would you both be prepared to go with your commitment?
Well, I'll go first. Thank you. We'll assess all requests on their merits, as we always do and always will. We work very closely with our American ally and our other allies, including New Zealand. So it's a very, very close, intimate relationship in terms of defence and security matters. We're part of the Five Eyes countries that have the closest intelligence and security collaboration, as you know. So we'll assess it on its merits. I should say that Australia already has one of the largest, if not the largest, presence in the alliance against Daesh, other than that of the United States in terms of foreign contributions. So we have a very substantial commitment there, and I just want to thank, as I say again, thank the New Zealand government and the New Zealand men and women of the New Zealand Defence Forces for the outstanding role they're playing in working with our force at Taji in building the capacity of the Iraqi armed forces, and of course also now their police, their domestic security forces, which is very important because as areas are liberated from Daesh, it's important that there are the police that can go in and maintain the order that the army has secured by their defeating the terrorists.
What about, though, specifically more boots on the ground? If there is a request for more resources, can you give any indication of what you would commit? I mean, the US Defence Secretary is looking at an acceleration in the US mission in the Middle East.
Well, as I just said earlier, we will assess any and every request from the United States on its merits and make a decision. But we haven't received that request, and when we do, we will assess it very carefully.
Prime Minister English, is that the same position for New Zealand as well on that question?
Well, look, it's our intention to continue the work we're doing with Australia. You'll remember that was much discussed about the commitment to Iraq. We wouldn't want to underestimate the complexity of the situation in Syria. The US is working on it, trying to find a path through there to some kind of stability, however you define that, looks to us to be a real challenge. We'll just wait and see what comes out of that.
The next question we're going to have is from Corin Dan.
Prime Minister Turnbull, I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on whether you were concerned about a growing trend of protectionism globally. You're obviously talking a lot about free trade. How concerned are you about that? And when you talk of a joint approach, when there's talk of a joint approach between New Zealand and Australia on free trade, do you see that as some sort of Anzac front in terms of trying to push for a future TPP without the US?
Well, I think we work very closely together in so many areas, and we are very much of the same mind on the importance of free trade for all the reasons that Prime Minister English just set out in his opening remarks. As far as protectionism is concerned, you can understand the way in which it is being presented. What you find is at a time of very rapid change, both economic and technological change, that produces anxiety, and people can be persuaded, in some cases, that the answer is to throw up walls and to, stop trade, increase trading barriers to trade. My view, and I know Bill's position too, is that is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Free trade means more jobs, means more growth. We've got to remember, Australia and New Zealand are relatively small compared to places like China and the United States, relatively small, open trading economies. We have a much bigger percentage of our GDP in Australia depends on trade than, for example, the comparative percentage in the United States. So trade is critically important for Australian jobs. So I just say, as I said at the G20, protectionism is not the ladder to get you out of the low growth trap. It is the shovel to dig it deeper and deeper and deeper. Protectionism leads to poverty, and we've seen that film before. We saw it at the time of the, nearly 90 odd years ago, in the Great Depression. It was protectionism. Because of the concerns created by the Depression, countries started putting up trade barriers. It only made it worse. So we are pursuing our rational national self-interest in promoting trade.
The next question is from Tom Iggulden.
Hello, Tom Iggulden from ABC News. Question to you, Mr Turnbull, first. Can you rule out a tax increase in May's budget? And if you can't, doesn't that mean that Tony Abbott is right to raise that very concern? A related question to you, Mr English. How helpful was the 15% GST here in New Zealand in returning your budget to surplus?
Well, you should go first.
Okay. Well, actually, not helpful in returning it to surplus because we did this is back in 2010, some time ago, essentially a tax switch. We increased GST and reduced income tax, and we also increased taxes on property. So, sorry, excuse me. But we have got an efficient tax system that means that as the economy grows, it is generating revenue that's greater than our expenditure. That's helping us back to surplus.
Thanks, Tom. We have no plans to increase tax. Indeed, all of our plans for tax were set out in the budget last year, and they included a reduction in personal income tax, which stopped 500,000 Australians on middle incomes from going into the second highest tax bracket. And it included the reductions in business tax, company tax, following New Zealand's example, I might say, to make ensure that our company tax regime was more competitive. And so we are pursuing that reform in the Parliament at the moment. So our tax plans were set out in the budget and they're being pursued in the Parliament. That's our commitment. So in 2014, personal income tax was increased, you may remember, with the deficit levy, putting 2% on the top personal rate. In the budget last year, in 2016, personal income tax was reduced, and that reform has gone through the Parliament. But we are still seeking to get the support of the Senate to the business tax cuts. And I don't know, Bill, whether it's not my job to interview you, but I might just try now. One question Tom, I'm sure, would have liked to ask you is how important do you think your more competitive company tax rate has been? Because you were the architect of that.
Well, look, we think it's really important to signal that we want reinvestment in the businesses, and that because that's what grows the jobs and grows the capacity. So we've got a pretty settled rate. It's lower than Australia.
It is.
We had hoped that it would attract a large number of Australian businesses across the Tasman, but that hasn't quite happened yet. So we might have to lower it again.
Can I just
Well, there you go.
Can I just ask you, though, to address the second part of the question? Is Tony Abbott out on a lark then in his comments today?
Well, I'm sorry, I can't comment on those. I'm not sufficiently familiar with them to do so.
The next question we have is from Barry Soper.
Prime Minister Turnbull, you've talked a lot today about the friendship and the family nature of the relationship between Australia and New Zealand. We've got an effective amnesty on citizenship meant to kick in, I think, in July.
Yep.
Is that still on track? And do you envisage a day when Australians living in New Zealand will be treated the same as New Zealanders living in Australia, which is an unequal treatment of certainly New Zealanders in Australia?
Well, how Australians are treated in New Zealand is a matter for the government of New Zealand. So you've got to address that question to your New Zealand Prime Minister. The pathways to citizenship measure will begin, as you noted, on the 1st of July, and we believe there is around 60,000 New Zealanders resident in Australia who will be able to take advantage of it, and that's an estimate, of course. Time will tell how many seek to do so, and it will enable those people who meet those requirements, and we have modified them to make sure that people who've been out of the workforce because of caring responsibilities, for example, will not be disadvantaged. So those arrangements, which were negotiated, were agreed to between Prime Minister Key and myself last year, will begin in a few months.
Can you envisage, though, the day that tax-paying New Zealanders living in Australia will be entitled to the same as tax-paying New Zealanders Australians living in New Zealand?
Well, again, it is how Australians are treated in New Zealand, which I'm sure is always courteously and collaboratively, other than on matters relating to sport. But I'm sure that's a matter for the New Zealand government. But we, New Zealanders, have a special access to Australia, as you know. But New Zealanders, and we've made the special provision about pathways to citizenship, which applies to New Zealanders who meet the requirements who arrived between 2001 and 2016, but New Zealanders who seek to have permanent residence in Australia or seek to move to citizenship in Australia in the future can obviously apply through the normal channels.
And the final question that we're going to have for this media conference is from Jennifer Raker.
Lovely. Thank you very much to you both. Mr Turnbull, if I can just cast your mind back across the Tasman at home, have you received any assurances from George Christensen that he won't be abandoning the party? And can you, in terms of that, can you really afford not to give in to his demands?
Well, I've never seen any indication that he is anything other than a committed member of the coalition party room.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just ask if the media can stay seated while the Prime Ministers leave the room, please.